Hey, Iburu, Iboya, Ibuche, everybody in Cyberland. Hey, it's your favorite Babalao. At least I hope so. Omodun, Odileke, coming at you with another great session. You know what? Before I even do this, let's just talk it out. Let's talk it out, right? Hey, so this is actually going out, right, to our members because we value our members, right, on the channel. One, two, I have this broadcasted out through YouTube live, but also through the Zoom, we'll be giving the presentation of what is Unit 1, right, of this process, right? So we already understand that at the end of last week, we went over kind of an introduction of the Yoruba cosmology, right? Because that's what Unit 1 is encompassing. Now we're going to explore even further, right? More particularly, we're going to get after exploring Ejiogbe, right? In Ifa spiritual teachings, we understand quite a few different things when it comes to Ejiogbe. We understand that, for those of you who have been around a while, Babalaos, we love to use Ejiogbe as the baseline for everything, and rightfully so. And then to truly understand the introduction of the Yoruba cosmology, right, it's important for us to also understand what is Eyobe. Right? So, wanted to make sure that everybody understands that one. And two, before I start displaying screens, I want to make sure you guys hear me loud and clear. There's no problems, and everybody is doing well. For those of you who are tuning in on the Zoom link, which is my godchildren and the Ile, right? You guys have direct access with me. If you guys care to ask questions, please ask questions. That's okay, right? If you want to type it in the chat, that's okay as well. I'll be monitoring both chats, both on YouTube Live and also on Zoom. So, with that said, there's no questions. Everybody kind of understands. Let's try our best to kind of save our questions to a good time so that way I can review the questions and then we can have a great conversation on the topic. Understanding that probably your questions will be answered later on in the course, but with that, I think we can just jump right in unless anybody has any questions. And a little boy Abucheche, Daniela, Taishan hitting me up in Zoom. Many blessings to each and every one of you. All right, so let's display this screen. Again, the intent of me displaying the screen, right, is to give you a taste, particularly of what is this course all about, right? And it's just, again, running through 4 sessions with you so that you better have a better understanding of what is a Yoruba cosmology. For those of you who are receiving Hand of Ifa, those of you who have been in the faith for a while, maybe you already have a good understanding, but now you're hearing a different perspective. That is the intent. So, with that said, I am now displaying the slides, right? And I need somebody to tell me that they see it and we can get going. So, Shaman 05 line. Hey, Buruboya Bucheche. Hey, do you see the slideshow? Okay. If you do, just give me a thumbs up or say yes, and then we can press forward. And those for you in Zoom land, do the same for me, please. Make sure that you can see everything perfectly fine. Okay, perfect. Now that we've established that and everybody can see what's going on, now we can kind of jump right in and kind of get into the lesson. Now, for those of you who are tuning in on YouTube Live, right, my members in YouTube Live, please send me an email, right, so I can send you the student handout. For those of you who are tuning in on Zoom, which are my ELE members, right, I am going to go ahead and put that document in the Zoom chat. Please understand that the Zoom chat, right, is for those of you who decide to sign up after the first month and go on to the Botanica website, right? And you decide, hey, this is something that I really want to get on. I want to learn and I want to join this educational plan. Perfect. You will actually be getting the links to the YouTube live, I'm sorry, to the Zoom, right? And we will no longer be doing this on the YouTube live studio. So this is just a way for you to kind of better understand how this plays out. Again, if you subscribe, and let's say you do go through the Botanica website, let's say you do decide to join the classes, right? And let's say you miss a class, they will be pre-recorded, and I will be able to open that to you if you miss a class. So this is not one of those things that if you miss a lecture, you're done. Hopefully somebody gives you notes. I'm not doing that. I will share the video with you. It'll have an expiration date so you have some time to review. And then from there, we will keep pushing forward. So hopefully that kind of helps tailor, our left and right bounds if you do decide to proceed with this after July, or after the next 2 sessions, because again, I'm doing 4 sessions with everyone, all the members, everybody in the Ile, so that you guys can have a firm understanding and know what you're getting yourself into. So hopefully that all makes sense. So with that, let me go ahead and just drag this handout into my Zoom. And for those of you who are on Zoom, boom, there you go. And now on with the show. What do you guys think? All right. So, hey, something I really want to kind of just make sure we understand. Right? Anytime I do anything spiritual, I could be waking up in the morning, I can be easily teaching like I am right now. Something that I really want to make sure that you guys are you know, considerate of is that I always give thanks to Olodumare first. I always give thanks to God first. And that's going to be something that I really want you to take away from this, right? So starting an invocation right before we begin is important. But not only is that important, but I think it's also important to highlight, right, what it means, right? Because I can say Olodumare Moyumba, right? But do you truly know what it means? So I want to make sure you understand it. So if I say Olodumare Moyumba, I give reverence to Olodumare. If I say Aye Mondube, I give thanks to the earth. If I say Orum Mukio, I say I greet the spiritual realm, right? If I say Eshu Danya Onya, I mean Eshu, open the road. If I say Orunmila Kowa Ni Mu Orunmila, bring us heavenly wisdom. So, with that said, I want to go ahead and get right to it. All right. So, with that said, what do we know about Ejiogbe? Right? What do we know about Ejiogbe? So, we're going to go over quite a few things here, right? And again, my goal is to wrap this up within an hour, maybe an hour and a half, right? After questions and whatnot. So, 75 minutes and then 15 minutes reserved for question is the goal. So hey, Boroboya Bucheche to Diaz, my man. Okay, Moyo back on the scene. All right, let's get after it. Let's get after it. So, this is what we're gonna go over. This is the outline. Obviously, you guys can read. I'm not one to read off of the slides. I'm one to open up your eyes and kind of show you where we're going. You guys can read it, and then I'm just gonna give you some narrative in the background. As always, ask questions. So, what do we know? So when we talk about Ejiogbe, and we talk about the very first Odun, right, in the 256 signs of the Ifá Corpus, right? So it's not just the beginning chronologically, right? It represents the principle of structure, alignment, and right action, right? Ejiogbe is pure light, pure consciousness, and divine intelligence, right? And it's important for us to talk about this particular Odun above all when we're trying to introduce the framework of what is Yoruba cosmology, because you're going to begin to see, right, that this is the beginning of it all. This was the catalyst that started everything, right? So this connects directly with the week one, what I call the first session of unit one, so week one alpha, right? Understanding the Yoruba cosmology, right? We went over Orun, right? The realm, right, of blueprints. If you guys remember me mentioning that. We talked about Aye, the realm of manifestation, right? And then in Ejiogbe, when I start to bring both lesson plans together, we start to learn that in Ejiogbe, right, the cosmological theory, right, becomes narrative. An idea comes to fruition. The cosmic energy and the creation by God becomes true. So the silence of Orun, the ancestral plane, becomes the speech of creation, which now begins to kind of bring you some form of understanding on why we rely so heavily on the ancestors, on Orun, that spiritual plane for the Babalaos out there. Now you understand why Orun is so pivotal, right, for the upbringing of Babalaos. Right now, whether you're a Babalao and you receive Orun, or you're an Aleyu and you receive Orun, right? It's mainly geared to give you a track to becoming a Babalao one day, right? So Eyobe is the Odun in which Olodumare, okay, begins to communicate with the Iremoles, right? From it emerges both destiny, right, and order, right? It is the first ray that separates darkness and establishes the orientation of what this faith is based on. Hopefully, you guys all understand that, right? And then before I jump into the next slide, I want to ensure that we understand a couple of things, right? First is in Oriki, Omeyobe, that talks about Biamba fe erimba eyobe amamo onya, which is if we talk with the Yobe, we will know the path. Okay? I am not of the Yoruba tongue and dialect, right? So I'm sure I may be butchering that a little bit, but obviously, there's accents there, so don't hold that against me. But with that said, that's important. All right. East Stafford. Hey, Buddha boy, Abucheche. Good to see you on here. Good to see you on here. Okay. Bridget, the Buddha boy, Abucheche. All right, so let's jump right in. Okay, what do we know? What do we know? All right, we already kind of went over this a little bit, right? But now we're going to go into a little bit more detail because sometimes when we talk philosophy or if we talk theory, or we speak about even Ifá and the framework, sometimes we can get lost in the sauce. So sometimes it's important for us to go line by line to ensure that we are understanding. Okay? Little boy, Buche Plan, how you doing, brother or sister? I'm just so used to saying that. So Eyobe, right, is the first Odu. We understand that. We understand that Eyobe is the first, but we also understand that is the Odun, the foundation Odun in the Ifá Corpus of things, right? It is regarded, right, as the voice of light, right, that emerged at the dawn of creation when Orunmila first cast divination to organize reality. Right? You see how this sounds just slightly different than maybe our general understanding of things. Because in Western civilization and how we are raised, we understand a Western framework of thinking, right? We understand God, right? We understand this is the earth. We understand there's humans. We understand there's things in between. But we really didn't necessarily wrap the understanding of the symbols and the esoterics and the sounds and the vibrations into the understanding of what is the true Yoruba cosmology framework. So yes, it was Orunmila who first casted, right, to organize reality with the Odun of Eyobe. And so it carries within it unbroken communication between Orun, the spiritual realm, and Aye, the physical realm. This is the reason why you go to Babalaos. Because Babalaos, when they're initiated, they are now entering the Orun, the spiritual realm, and becomes mediators between Aye and Orun. So when I say this, right, I need you guys to understand that a Babalao that's initiated, right, is now someone who's walking with the dead. This is why it's foundational to understand these studies. And now you understand why we don't dance to the beat of the drums, because we invoke from the spiritual realm not everything that's good, but sometimes bad. So, foundationally, that's just an example on why I need you all to listen. I need you all to comprehend and really take this in. But enough about that. So, let's talk about the foundation, right? The foundation of Yoruba cosmology. Ejiogbe, it embodies the very foundation, right, of the Yoruba cosmology, of course, right? But it's the first articulation of creation, right? Divine law, spiritual order of things, right? Because we talked about it being the light, it being the reality, but with it has to come some form of guideline, something has to come out of this, right? So it teaches us that everything begins with breath. Everything begins with vibration. So when you speak or pray under this Odu, right, we are tapping into the creative principle itself. In Ifa, all Babalaos know that we will always mark Ejiogbe on our Opun Ifa, right? The wooden tablet with the Ierosum, the powder, and we're always marking Ejiogbe because we have to begin to open up with this particular Odung in order to ensure that we are tapping in to the bridge between Aye and Orun to give you a better understanding. So when I talk about divine knowledge origin, okay, we understand that Ejiogbe carries the original divine intelligence. Right? It is not only a story, it is a sound, a code, a vibration. Right? This Odum teaches us that the first wisdom emerged not from force, right, but from insight and observation. And this is very important to us to understand. And you're going to begin to understand that further as we continue on. Hey, boy, Abuche Chastity, good to see you on here. So let's dig into that just slightly. So Ejiogbe, we understand, right, that Ejiogbe plays a unique role, right, in the set of 256 Odun Ifa, right? Not just as the first in the order, but the foundational and wisdom and vibration, as we stated, right? Every other Odu, right, in the 256 Oduns, well, 255 after Ejiogbe, right, follow a harmonic law, a sacred principle, right, that's first introduced by Ejiogbe. It sets the moral tone on how humanity is to live in alignment with both Ori, which is your inner head, your subconscious, your destiny, right? And Olodumare, the divine order. We spoke about Ori a little bit in week 1 in the first session, right? And we understand that that divine light, we understand that that Ori was that essence that was sent from God down. So Ejiogbe is now bridging that gap on what exactly was sent down. If Ori is going to manifest here in the womb of some woman that's going to push it out, right, then we need to begin to understand what that divine message is. What is that divine order given to us by Olodumare? And this is where it begins to spill it out. Everything starts with the Ejiogbe, and Ejiogbe begins to describe these things to us. So when I talk about the primordial status of things, right, Ejiogbe is regarded foundational, right, symbolizing, right, the blueprint of existence, because we understand that the spiritual plane was the blueprint. In essence, just like many other religions in the world, we always say that God's intent was to ensure that Aye became a mirror image of the spiritual plane, of Orun, of heaven, of, some may even call it Olorun, right? But Olorun has, different different definitions in Yoruba translations, like the sun, right? So there's a lot of things that all point to the same direction, but we understand now where we are trying to go. So it stands as kind of like a reference point from which all other, right, draw guidance, right? Every other odum, every ori, every motion, every spiritual connection, every ebo, every obra is drawn through the line of Ejiogbe. So there's some spiritual understanding. The verse of Ejiogbe sounds profound, right? And it has a lot of spiritual teachings, right? That attach to it, right? That influence a lot of the religious practices, the life decisions that we do, right? So when we look at those things, we say, okay, so Ejiogbe is teaching to extend some type of practical aspect in my life, right? Guiding ethical and social behaviors within the community, right? So then you start to think, well, what does that mean, Babalao? What are you talking about? You're talking in riddles. And probably, because a yoga is a very complex thing, but let's dig into a little bit deeper. But for the sake of better understanding, what better way to do this than what our tradition truly calls for, right? Apataki, right? And that's where I want to dig into next. So in the beginning, right, when the world was still chaotic, right, and the other Iremoles, right, descended, right, without consultation, confusion ruled Aye. Orunmila remained in Orun, right, approached Olodumare, made the sacrifice he needed to make, and sought permission through divination before descending to Aye. Because of the obedience and the structure, Olodumare granted Orunmila the authority to organize the earth and establish Ifa. One of the many roles that Orunmila plays in this faith. Orunmila is just not as something as simple as, oh, he's wisdom, he's destiny. The Babalaos, they're disciples of Orunmila. It goes deeper than that. And that's what we're trying to get after. So no different than what I just told you in Napataki. We understand that through the creation, through the light, right, through the image and the blueprint that we were trying to establish, we understand that not all energy was able to clash and needed to be organized in a certain manner, right? And we preserve these things through oral text. We preserve these things through patakis, through campfire stories, right? We preserve these things, right? And this is how I'm able to communicate with you today, right? It's not because it's something I made up. No, this is called decades of studying and looking and searching and talking to elders and recording and writing down and establishing a library and getting into it. And so Yob's wisdom, what I learned is the preservation through storytelling. This is why patakis are very important. But Yob's wisdom, although preserved through oral transmission, we need to understand that sometimes patakis are referenced in a different time, right? It could have even been in a different creation. So with that, we understand that the verses a lot of times are memorized, they're sung, they're spoken out loud, there's storytelling, there's chants, there's parables, all reflect its spiritual rhythm and role in keeping ancestral knowledge alive. So that's my first thing to you all. The pataki I shared with you a second ago is something that you need to understand so you understand the establishment of things. And there's many more patakis in there. That was just one I wanted to share based on the context. Right? But then you start to say, well, wait a minute, Bawalao. What do you mean chanting and parables and singing, right? And then you begin to understand why in Ifa we're constantly singing, we're constantly talking to to a certain set of tunes. Maybe we're singing because we're making omero. Maybe we're singing because we're sacrificing. Maybe we're singing in order to call on to something. But there's a lot of things going on because the vibration that I told you that was necessary in order to establish that life and that blueprint is necessary in all aspects that we do. This is the reason why that if you haven't got into the habit of trying to learn some of the songs that are very publicly available, right? I think it's important for you to start to connect in that rhythm, right? Because a lot of our rituals, right, that honor Ejiogbe, right, they emphasize light, they emphasize order, they emphasize purity, they emphasize breath, right? And drumming and prayers and morning offerings facing the east are common expressions, right? If you wanna give reverence to this Odun, right? And I tell you this because that's the other piece of this homework. Not just understanding the story or logging in and trying to listen, but also because I want you to start to build habits, right? That bring you that divine light, order, and purity, right? So that means in the morning, before you start anything else, before you even brush your teeth, how many of you maybe just open up your window and face the east? Maybe you're not facing the east. Maybe you got to be like me. When I wake up in the morning, I got to open up my garage, go out the garage, and I got to face east because I don't necessarily have a window that's directly facing east. And I have my little hikara, right, that I always keep with me right here. You'll see it. There's my hikara, right? And I grab it, boom, and I keep moving, right? And I start with the same thing and the same prayer that I just said earlier, right? Now, the moyumba itself, when I give praise to all the elements, right? I always start with God. But you have to ask yourself, why? Because in Eyobe, it is the one that confirms that we face the east. It confirms that we always got to give thanks to God first. And we got to give thanks to those iremoles that kind of surrounded themselves. So something as simple as looking towards the east, grabbing your head and giving thanks to God and raising your hands, right? Moyumba Olodumare, right? Moyumba to all the iremoles, the orishas, and the ancestors. Moyumba Mayori. Something as simple as that, believe it or not, begins to immediately click, immediately set the tone for you. And now you move on, right? And you can start your day right. The reason why I tell you don't do it, do it and, immediately following waking up, don't brush your teeth, don't do anything, is because it is your original essence. Some people are like, oh man, that's some dirty breath. No, but it's your breath. And it's a breath that has been kind of just sitting around, right, while you slept and you held dormant. It doesn't have the breath of the food and the breath of the drink that you had or anything like that. I know it's you and it's your very essence. So I wanna pair that with now a pataki. So another pataki that comes out of Eyobe talks a lot about the voice that called down to the world. Right. So before time, there was a vibration, but there was no direction. We understand through Eyobe that when Olodumare created the universe, it was a light that came out of the darkness. Right? So Olodumare asked, who should organize the world at that point? Because there's only merely vibrations. Orunmila stepped forward with Eyobe as he divined the sacred utterance, right, formed the split silence, right? And I want to give you guys a better idea on what I'm talking about there. So when I hold up, let's say an eleke, right? And you begin to see that there's four portions on one side, four portions on another one, right? If they're on the number one side, right? Not the number two side, right? The light side, right? Then you begin to understand that that is a yoke. And the split that we talk about is the first utterance formed, right? And the split silence, right? So the vibration held still by the power of a yoke, right? So matter began to obey sound. So from that point on, all life responded to the voice of truth. Right? This pataki that was kind of an excerpt, right, is a pataki that affirms Ejiogbe as the voice that formed the world, right? Not by command, but by rhythm. The clinking and the clanking. The enkine is coming off of the hand. The communication mediums, which is why they're tools today. Right? And that's something to always remember. Little boy Abuche Che, John, how you doing? Okay, so now we go a little further. Understanding Eyobe, right? And the voice of creation. Right, so what do we know about this? What do we know about this? So I would tell you, I just went over a lot of different concepts, right? But here's something that I want you to understand. That at the end of the day, Eyobe embodies the very foundation, right? We understand the divine law, the spiritual order. I need you to take that home. I need you to write it down. I need you to understand this. When we speak and pray under this Odun, we're tapping into the creative principle itself. The divine knowledge that comes off of this, right, is a Yobe carrying the original divine intelligence, right? It's not just a story, it's a sound, it's a code, it's a vibration, right? The Odun teaches us that the first wisdom emerged not from force, but from insight, from observation. This is the reason why people advise always use your head. Ifa inu. Make sure that got it. Don't take this personal, but maybe we need to change our behaviors. Maybe our behaviors are not necessarily consistent with ROD, but what is ROD? And what was the divine order from Olodumare? And when you start to put it all together, it can get complicated. That's why we gotta go slow. But I need you to understand the Yobe, because the Yobe is the one that's beginning to unlock the DNA of Ifa. So you have a deeper understanding of what it is that I am walking into, what it is that this beautiful cosmic force and divinations and priests and priestesses that serve Olodumare, right? What is their goal? So food for thought. So when I talk about spiritual guidance, right? The verse of Eyobe offers kind of some of those profound teachings on ethics, clarity, patience, alignment, right? It guides us to see clearly, speak truthfully, and act with rhythm and not chaos. It is the compass of moral and metaphysical life. That is what I want you to take away from Eyobe. So Eyobe advises you, right? Let's talk about practical life teachings for a second. Eyobe advises you to rise early, greet the world with purpose, right? And speak only when we are aligned, right? This is the reason why that morning ritual I mentioned is important. That's why I said, hey, you have to learn Eyobe first. This is why I said you got to face the east, because Eyobe is the one that's telling us that. Eyobe is the sign that tells us about Ori. Eyobe is the sign that talks about even the head cleansings, the rogation, the rogaciones that we do, and why we do it and how we do it. Eyobe. Because we only speak when we are aligned. Right? So it governs the leadership, the integrity, and how to hold sacred responsibility. Many people judge me. I'm going to tell you, just to not divert, but people judge me because they say, hey, you're always telling us, don't run, don't rush. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Hey, Parino, I think you're going to hold me back. I'm trying to get after it. Hey, I will be a hypocrite if I held you back, right? Because I rushed when I first came in. But I also know the importance of what, if I would have learned what you guys are learning today, then I would have been a lot more grateful, which is why I'm in a rush to push these things out. This is why we started the YouTube, so you have a better understanding. And so Orunmila, in a different Pataki in Ejiogbe, right? Orunmila once asked how to teach the people when they refuse to listen. This is another Pataki, by the way. Orunmila asked how to teach people when they refuse to listen. He was told to sit in silence until they approached him first. When they did, he uttered one word. And in that one word, it changed their path. That's the excerpt, right? But look how simple this pataki is. It shows the power of sacred timing, speech, and vibration under the energy of Ejiogbe. This pataki came from Ejiogbe. Orunmila had already casted Ejiogbe, looked for advice from Ifá, stood down, and the power of Ejiogbe was able to change with one uttered word. So imagine the power that you have being direct descendants, all of us, of Ejiogbe, being in the mirror creation through Ejiogbe, being guided through Orunmila. You are more in control of your life than you think. If you are only capable of breaking some of these barriers and seeing what this world has to offer. Something to think about. So now let's talk about understanding Ejiogbe kind of as the voice of creation. Make sure I got nobody questions. All right, everybody must be intrigued. All right, we're gonna keep it moving. All right. So let's talk about this. So Ejiogbe, right? In Yoruba creation, right? And this is not designed to tell you the full story, right? I have other course material that I have introduced to my ile or those that have been with me for a long time on the creation story. I got documents, I got slideshows, I got all types of things, right? But again, this is like my fifth iteration of what I wanted to do for schooling or academia, right? For the community. So in Ejiogbe, right, we understand that this represents, went too fast. In Ejiogbe, this represents the primordial voice, right, that initiates the act of creation in the Yoruba cosmology, right? We understand that, right? Just mentioned it. The Odun, we understand, symbolizes a divine utterance. Okay, we understand that. Olodumare speaks creation into existence. Okay, we got that. Before anything could be shaped or formed, there had to be a vibration, a command, a principle, right? And that principle was Ejiogbe, right? So through that principle was started to build order and meaning, right? And through the sacred verses and the patakis and the orikis, right? Where Ejiogbe begins to bring the structure to the cosmos. And now we have the formation of the universe. We got the formation of the planets and the parallel universes and all this other good, beautiful things, right? And we can even get into the topic of quantum physics if you wanted to, but we're not going to do that. But the DNA of the universe is created, and the multiple universes out there is created. And it offers that first articulation of rhythm, ethics, and patterns. Right? It teaches that nothing emerges without form, and no form holds without a divine blueprint. And I say this to say that we are form. There's an opataki, right, that has different variations, but we understand that we are form. And through this pataki, it was just in order to give a better depiction without having to go through philosophy and go through the deeper concepts of Ejiogbe, but it was a very simplistic way to understand what I just said. Right? When I say no form holds without divine blueprint, what I'm talking about is that famous story of Obatala. When Iku, death, gave him the clay to shape the human form. And when that occurred, we understand that the concept of Emi, the divine breath from Olodumare, is what animated us. So again, it teaches us that nothing emerges without form. So we didn't just magically get here. It doesn't work like that. The form was created, and no form holds, right, without its divine blueprint, which was Emi, breath of life. And with that breath of life, lives submerged inside of your ori. So each and every one of you is touched by God. Each and every one of you has the essence of God in you. You are more capable of greatness than maybe you even know. Well, we live bounded by these left and right, barriers that we call society. And that's something that we need to truly understand and embody. And Ejiogbe teaches us that. So, all right, Buddha boy, Bucheche. Gary, how you doing? Multi-variable. Hey, Gary, I'm sorry, I call you great. Gary, you and I can talk for a minute. Trust me, I can geek out a little bit. But it sounds like you might geek out more than me, but hey, that's beautiful. But yes, I will look into the multi-variable concepts of things. So beautiful. Okay. Now, let's talk about another pataki. Right? This pataki also comes from Ejiogbe, right? And the verse of Ejiogbe are considered, central to the sacred narrative, right? And this is the reason why, again, like I told you earlier in the historical style, we need to understand things, right? Because we understand that in these patakis, in these sacred verses, the importance, right, of what they are. These verses and these patakis, like the one I just mentioned with Obatala and Iku and Emi, right? This contains the code of wisdom, power, and continuity. And Yobet teaches us the truth, right? Through prayer, through singing, through action. And it's a sacred act of creation. And Yobet teaches, right, that Olodumare created the universe, right? What I've been telling you all, right? So now I'm just bringing it back together. That breath, speech, and vibration are very important. Which brings me to my next part, right? Where we understand that primordial silence, right, was broken by sound, right? That sound, right, was the first tache. When we talk about that split silence earlier, through Eyobe, aligning itself with straight lines, right? We begin to kind of see that as the first tache. Everything begins in order. Creation is not spontaneous, right? It's governed by rhythm and wisdom. So here's the key. Eyobe contains the 16 principles that all other Oduns branch from, right? So if I look at a binary code, right? 111111111, right? So four ones and four ones. And I start to change these to ones and zeros, right? It's a binary code, right? But it's also a DNA sequence, right? That carries the code of the body. Right? So Eyobe carries the blueprint for the cosmos, for the universe. Right? And I get it. If I'm talking too fast, if I'm not explaining myself, ask questions. So then we jump into the next concept of things. How Eyobe embodies that creative principle. Well, when we talk about um generative force, okay, for example, right? Eyobe symbolizes, right, that primordial energy, as you can kind of see there. But that initiates the life and the cosmo creation continuously, right? It is the generative breath of Olodumare manifesting across multiple dimensions, right? The force is not a one-time act, right? It renews existence perpetually, right? It doesn't just do it one time, right? The force is constantly moving. This is why this faith is very important to understand, because this is not a spectator sport, right? What I'm teaching you is the independence for you to go ahead and key in on who you are and where you're going. And then Yobe is the one that gives you those keys and tells you about all these beautiful things. Reason why people receive their Ikofa, Awofaka, Asentaye, Doesn't matter. Ifa is Ifa. But those sacred codings are now giving you the blueprint on where you need to go and how you need to get there. So now let's kind of think this out a little bit, right? So in Ejiogbe, creation is not static. We understand that. It teaches that everything must evolve and remain in alignment. So through the verses of Ejiogbe, we emphasize a certain thing, right? That change is not chaos, but divine order in motion, birth, decay, renewal. These are all sacred phases, right? How many times have you personally, right, have gone through some form of trial, tribulation, birth, death, decay, renewal, terminations? Doesn't matter, right? And you sit back and you say, what is going on? Right? And then what a lot of people like to do first is say, oh, it's Eshu, the trickster. He's just messing with you. No, 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 no. Eshu has a separate role, which we are going to talk about in a different session, right? But those are all sacred phases in order to keep you in the alignment, because only when you remain in alignment do you evolve. So in that case, it's important for us to better align ourselves and get to where we need to get to in order to get there, right? So food for thought. So as we begin to understand the unfolding, right, of existence, we understand that we got to go back. And Ejiogbe tells us immediately that the continuation of unfolding and the evolution of the life in the universe is continuous. It doesn't stop. It's never ending. Right? This is the reason why that even when you look at modern science today, going back to Gary's point, right? Gary, I wish I can see my screen a little bit better. There you go. I can see my chat now. So, so what Gary is talking about when we talk about multivariable calculus and we talk about the never-ending, right, cycle of things, and Gary, talk to me if I'm talking crazy, right? There finds that there is endless and infinite possibilities, right? So when we look at that, we have to understand what that is, constantly unfolding. Scientists, astrological scientists, or those who study the universe and look to the sky, right? We understand that we're constantly learning new things, constantly trying to understand why a star, diminished and why is a star created, and we make these things a little bit more complicated than what we need to. But we understand that whether a star died or whether a star blew up or whether something happened a million years ago, irrelevant. We just need to understand the simplicity of things. That is, there's a constant evolution of things, right? Ejiogbe doesn't speak of finality, right? It doesn't talk about the end, but of a constant emergence. And so as we consult Ifa, we participate in that same creative flow, right? So for each and every one of you, reflect on a moment when you had a consultation with me, or maybe you had a consultation with another Babalao, or maybe you received your hand of Ifa, or a Sentaye, or maybe you were parents that had your baby, receive their hand of Ifa immediately, and you begin to learn the blueprint on what I'm gonna do and how I'm gonna get there, right? And that is the concept, right? We are participating in this creative flow. And then when we start to see the barriers, or maybe we are not in alignment, we do an ebo. And that ebo is supposed to align us with the right energies and the power, which is why if I offer it to Yemaya and I'm offering it to the ocean, I'm offering it to the energy of water and life and sustainment in order to bring that energy back into something that I need so that my Ori can meet its divine um, destiny, right? Or its divine law placed to it by Olodumare, because Olodumare's breath and me lives inside your Ori. That is where I want your head to be. Right, Boroboy Abucheche. The Orishas exist in the time. Me and Gary, boy, we're gonna talk. Okay, so very nice. So we understand every consultation is a new verse, a new moment, right? In the cosmic song of things. This is the reason why your consultations are only as good as 16 days, right? We like to say up to 21 days to give you a little bit of grace period. But the divine numbers and the sensings and the cosmic order of those 16 days and how the universe moves is all attached to itself, constantly unfolding. And that's what a yoga begins to give you. Right. So let's look at another pataki. Look at another pataki. In the beginning, right, before the earth took form, right, there was only a vast silence of Orun, right? The Orumiles waited, right, unsure, of how to proceed, right? So Olodumare summoned Orunmila and gave him a single breath, a sacred sound, a vibration, and the instructions to cast a Ejiogbe upon the sacred map. Right? Sounds like things that we do today, right? Because we are following the actual traditions of things. As the pattern of a Ejiogbe emerged, right, the winds moved for the first time. The trees bent, right? Though there were no roots, right? Water began to stir in the abyss. Ejiogbe gave shape to the unformed and rhythm of the still. So this was not magic. This was a divine order made to manifest through vibrations and alignment. The universe was spoken into motion, right? And that particular verse in that pataki just kind of highlights some things, right? Because at the end of that pataki, we understand that from that moment, all Iremoles were instructed to divine before acting. So Ejiogbe became the law of beginnings, right? And it was not by might, but by breath, by structure, by reverence that life was born, right? And in that pataki, right, and that sacred apola in Ejiogbe, there's another verse in Ejiogbe, right? Basically, we understand a couple of things, right? When you walk day to day in modern day's life, right, you understand that, you go to Ifá, you get a consultation, you get advice through breath, through structure, through prayer, right? You understand the problem set or the blessings that need to be reinforced. And through that, life is born. Because again, life is constantly ever changing, ever unfolding. Hopefully, you guys are tracking what I'm putting down. All right. So now we talk about Ejiogbe, right? And we say that Oyobe's myth, right? They explain how influence of the creation and the structure of the world in Yoruba tradition, right? From shaping the land, the arrangements of seasons. Oyobe is an organizing force. We got that. Write that down, right? And make sure that you take that note, right? And again, for those of you who don't have your student handout because you're not on Zoom and you're on YouTube Live because you don't have, you're just not part of my ile, and maybe I spoil my ile a little bit. Um, email me and I will send you the student handout. But these are ways for you to start taking notes, right? So every time I foot stomp something, I need you to really focus on it because I think to me it's important for you to walk away after this lesson understanding certain things. So when we talk about a yobe, we understand that creation, structure, physical world, boom, right? The shaping of the land, the arrangement of the seasons, Eyobe is the organizing force. Okay, we understand that. We know that the role, right? The role in the spiritual world. Right? Little boy Daniela says yes to spoiling your God kids. Yeah, you're right. Cause Maybe other Parinos do this. You know what I mean? I'm not saying they don't. I'm just who knows? But the foundational stories, right, in Ejiogbe, right, has spiritual significance. Its connection in the Yoruba ancestral belief system. And Ejiogbe governs the divine law that shapes not only physical form, but the spiritual path and journey of all beings. Okay? Within the Yoruba purview, right? And the values, and in the world view of things. Yoruba provides the insight into the core Yoruba values. Again, the alignment, the reverence, the accountability, the destiny, right? And we understand that through many different stories. So we learn, right, to live in balance, with our Ori, with our community, with God, with each other, right? And I know I may be kind of repeating myself over and over again, but it's my way of kind of making sure that I'm hitting every point very thoroughly so that you truly have a deep understanding, right? And I'm only talking unto you about one sign and probably one of the most important signs, right? So I think it's time for another pataki. So here's a pataki, right? Long ago, right? In the sacred time before time, the earth was formless, it was flat, right? And two hills emerged, one dark and then one bright. And no one knew why. And the Iremoles stood in silence. Olodumare sent Eyobe, right, the first vibration, right, to speak between them. As Eyobe echoed between the hills, they began to rise and balance. One became the source of the night, and the other was the source of the day. The rivers learned their course, the winds, their patterns, and through the first sound, balance was born. The hills bowed to each other. The world was no longer silent, it was in order. This Pataki, right, begins to teach us, right, that everything finds meaning when spoken through divine order. Without a Yobe, creation remains raw. With a Yobe, all things find direction. So, why do I begin to say this? Because now we begin to understand the reason why things have to be balanced, the duality of things, right? And we start to having to look at things in a different manner. This is the reason why the waters and the oceans react differently to the moon. We understand that different seasons and how the world is rotating and where the equator is placed and how the distance of the sun. And if just a fraction of the gravitational pull of this world was to shift, right? A fraction, we will not be here today. That is divine order. That is divine law. This is the reason why we are able to live the way we are. If we just remember the DNA code, if only we remember these things that I'm telling you. And that's what I wanted to share with you. All right, boy, boy. Well, Gary's getting it in, boy. Orunmila in the strong force, Chango is the weak force. Elewa is the. I don't know what you're trying to tell me there, Gary. I'm sorry, brother. I didn't get that last part, but all good. But thank you for sharing that nonetheless. Okay, so we begin to understand this a little bit. So now I want to share with you. I want to share with you another side of this because I think this is going to be important, right? The symbols, the energies in a yobe. So what do we know about a yobe, right? What do we know about a yobe? So we understand something And this is something that I just want you guys to understand. Have you ever noticed that at a certain point in time, we find ourselves trying to understand the motif symbolism of duality? In a lot of other cultures, you see the fish pattern, right? You see the yin yang sign. You see that there's always a duality, no different than the two hills in the story that I mentioned. And that's because that things like the double fish, right? Light and dark, right? Action and stillness, Orun and Aye, right? In its mirrored reflection, right? It reflects it's some kind of like a divine equilibrium, I guess is the best way to put it, reminding us that all things exist in relational balance, right? Two fishes, right, also evoke movement, right, within sacred stillness, representing the inner and the outer currents, right? Not only of the fish, but of life, right, that remain paired in motion. And I tell you these things because that is merely an analogy to explain the double fish, right? And if you have not seen the double fish, put in duality in Google and say, double fish pattern, and you'll see the fishes, right? And you'll see where one's going one way and one's going another way, creating an equilibrium or a duality, right? And they have their representation, right? Ejiogbe is traditionally drawn by two vertical lines side by side, right? Each composed, right, of four paired marks, right? This imagery, or what you saw, if you saw the YouTube live when I put it on the screen, right? And I had the little icon, the screen, I guess, saver for the live. You saw, it was marked 1 1 1 1 1 1 1, right? Um, and the point of that, right, was to ensure that we understood the completeness and the harmony between the two realms. Because when I'm done marking all the way to the bottom, I slide both fingers up on the Obungifa to symbolize two realms, right? It also alludes to the breath and the rhythm, the core elements of the divine communication and life, right? This mark can be seen as the sacred alignment, right, of energy channels, similar, right, to the mediums, right, in the body, right, or the lay, right, of lines across the earth, right, or the tectonic plates that created mass and broke away and fit together like a puzzle, right? And when you see these things, right, you start to kind of say, man, there's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of symbolism. Okay. Um, okay. I want to make sure that for one reason or another, let me make sure I ain't got nothing in the chat here. Okay, good. So let's talk about some of the symbolism. We understand the number 8, right? We understand that Eogbe's configuration, highlights the power of the number 8. 1 1 1 1 1 1, right? You guys are getting me, right? I'm marking ones 4 times, or 4 on one side, 4 on another, creating that 8. And when you start to think about that number 8, right? I get all the Batala children all excited. Right? We talk about the sacred number of Obatala. We talk about the sacred number that represents the infinity, right? The balance, the cycle of return, symbolizing the divine equilibrium. It's the perfect pairing. It's the eternal unfolding. And now I want you to see everything that I've been talking to you now is starting to come together, right? As I try to explain this as best as I can, right? So the oppositional unity, right? Each paired, right, marks in Ejiogbe is not just a repetition, but a deliberate mirroring, representing the representation of me going like this, up one, up one. The representation underscores the importance, right, of the agreement between your Orinu, right, and your Ori Ode, right? The inward action to the outward action, the two fishes, the yin yang sign, right? The currents and the waves and the motion between the exchange of the moon and the sun, right? And then when we talk about just the actions of Ejiogbe, we understand its purity, its illumination, the presence of um of Ori, the divine clarity, and we always take it with white. And we say, why white? Because white is good, white is great, white. No, it's because within the darkness, the light was created, illuminated in this color white, right? Or clear, or what you want to better understand, right? Ejiogbe is the Odum that's most linked with that vibration and that tonal resonance, right? And it carries that signature, right? The voice of Olodumare, and it serves as a template for everything that we do. Right? So I know I said a mouthful there, right? But I want to make sure that we're getting along. All right. So then we start talking about balance and harmony, and we start to kind of see the interplay of the cosmic forces, and we understand the renewal. We talked about this, right? When Olodumare asked Orunmila how the world would take form, Olodumare answered him, right? Through the vibration and rest, the light and shadow, the breath and silence, right? And creation unfolded, right? Not in a single force, but in their dance, right? So something to just kind of think about when we see things, air, vibration, light, and sight, those things all matter. Let me make sure here that here, I want to make sure. I'm sorry to bother you guys. Let me just make sure here. Ah, okay, so then we got another concept that I want us to kind of go through. And I know I'm moving through this slow. I already know we're in an hour, and I'm talking a lot, and I apologize. Gary, I appreciate all the inputs you're putting in here, man. Beautiful stuff, man. Beautiful stuff. 8 is 2 to the third power. Without duality, there is. But I hear you, Gary. I know where you're going with this, but no, and you are 100% correct, right? That duality and that representation of one and one, right? Which is an exponent, right? When we start to see the number 8 and the divisions of 8. So no, beautiful. Well said. Okay. So when we talk about some of the governed realms, right, and association, when we talk about, Ejiogbe, I want to just make sure that we're on the same page, right? When we talk about the inner head, right, which is the consciousness, the wind and the breath, the light and the sunrise, the east direction, the proclamation, contrast, and declarations. Um, you know, um, all those things matter. The rhythm of chanting, tone healing, vibrational resonance. This is the reason why the Hindus are very much into the vibration sounds, right? In order for healing, right? The duality, the complementary concepts of things, the sacred polarity of everything, right? All to take us to this slide. I don't know if you guys see the slide there, but I'm pointing at it, right? Which is that ritual use and the divinatory meaning, right? Yobe often signals, that spiritual alignment or a return to original clarity. It's a sacred confirmation of one's path, bringing messages of light, responsibility, and divine oversight, right? And its association with the activation of spiritual contracts, can mark a movement, in your life, a moment when destiny becomes visible, right? Which is the reason why it's important for us to always remember a few things. When we talk about a yobe, it's very important for us to kind of understand that, in this particular understanding of things, right? This is the reason why in ritual practices, we use the white cloth, We use efun, which is cascarilla, right? We use cool water. We use things like coconuts, right? That are white on the inside, light foods, light colors. We're trying to attract something, and that's what Ejiogbe begins to tell us. In order for us to get the divine alignment, in order to meet the divine law, in order to unfold the universe, and in order for us to meet the destiny that we need to meet, we need to start to enact these things. No different than what I told you guys earlier when I said, hey, you got to face the east, right? The vibrations of breath, you chant, affirmations, prayers, however way you express Yakokang, your heart. So, food for thought. But I warn you, because when we talk about rituals and we talk about divination and we talk about some of these guidelines, I warn you about something. Everything that I told you up to this point is a way for you to humble yourself, for you to see the world differently, for you to walk upright and to have a thorough understanding. So that means that everything that you do in your alignment, some of those things that you can't do, right, have to be said, right? So we got to avoid pride, right? We could only speak truth. Don't begin anything without consent of your Ori or with some form of divine clearance, right? So, and when I say divine clearance, maybe that is a prayer from you. Maybe that is you waking up in the morning, facing the east, giving thanks to God and everything around us, right? To include the universe down and making your decision with that clarity, right? And that's something that we always got to remember, right? And there's another pataki in Ejiogbe that talks a lot about the ancient times, right? When silence reigned until Orunmila instructed people to place a white feather in water to the east at dawn. As breath stirred the feather, right, sacred speech returned, right? And in this particular pataki, it shows us that how clarity and divine communication are restored through ritual and alignment. Again, another pataki that's here to teach us something from the historical text to begin to allow us to open up our minds to see what the world is. And that's what Ejiogbe offers us. And I know you guys are probably at a certain point going to say, wait a minute, I'm trying to understand this a little bit more. Maybe I'm talking in too many parables, or maybe I'm talking over a little bit. Um, but the reason why I'm focusing on Ejiogbe is because when I get to the next lessons, of speaking about Eshu, speaking about your Ori, speaking about those are going to be a little bit more complex. Those are going to take you to better understand the Yoruba cosmology of things. It's going to take you to understand all these concepts. So then that way we can begin to build. So it's very important. And the reason why you start to maybe hear me repeat myself again and again to make sure that you are understanding. Beautiful. So when Ejiogbe and the emergence of the duality of things, right? And we start to kind of see, you know, the the balance of things, right? We talk about that cosmic balance, right? And you've heard me kind of talk about it at a certain point in time, this cosmic balance and where does it take us, right? Ejiogbe teaches us that vital role of maintaining balance, sustaining universe, harmony, and order, that interconnectedness, right, of everything that this world has to offer, right? Making sure that we understand where that takes us, making sure that we understand where that goes is the reason why I'm telling you everything that I'm telling you, right? So hopefully you guys are truly getting it and you kind of truly understand, right? Because destiny, the dynamic nature of destiny, the purpose of living, right? That is where you're trying to get after. That is where you are moving towards, right? And that intent and that awareness and being able to shape where you go is an active participation on your part. And no one can stop you from that but you, right? No one can deter you off of your destiny but you, right? And obviously, there's always going to be tools out there. Priests and priestesses are tools for humans to align themselves, specifically Babalaos that have a responsibility to the community. So, just food for thought. I spoke about this in length, and I think now we got to talk a little bit more about the principle of duality. I think we have to understand this. We spoke about this, right? This is our version now of making sure that we understand this, right? There should be nothing in here that should be new. There should be nothing in here that you don't know. All of this should be known to you in one way, shape, or form, right? Because when I talked about the duality, right, and I talk about the principle of duality, let's say I talk about, um, let's talk about black, white, light, color, dark, whatever, right? Let's say we just talk about that, right? We're talking about male and female, right? We're talking about complements and contrasts, the opposites of harmony, right? Inhale, exhale, balancing forces, right? And that always brings me to another Badaki that lives in the Ejiogbe that talks about the two palm trees that stood side by side. One bore fruit and the other did not. And then the people praised the fruitful one, but ignored the other. And Orunmila arrived one day and said, the barren palm offers the shade. Without it, the fruit tree would wither, right? So that's just another pataki that comes out of Ejiogbe that starts to talk about the duality of things and where that interdependentness is important. So, guys, see that? You see the slides, you understand what I've been telling you up to this point, right? And with that, now we get to field some questions. Now I can unmute my computer because I thought there was some feedback and I wanted to make sure that you guys weren't getting it. But let me hear it, guys. Let me hear it. Because a couple of things that I want to share with you. If you have questions, great. Come online for my Zoom people. Raise your hand and I'll call on you. For my folks on YouTube Live, let me know. You know what I mean? Go ahead and send me a chat, right? And or something on the chat, and I will definitely get to it. But you know, I would love to hear your impressions, your questions about the patakis, or a personal insight on duality, maybe balance, vibrations. Gary was sharing a lot of different concepts as well as we begin to mix science and spirituality, understanding that the world has always been kind of telling us that this is the way things are. But at the end of the day, we're just maybe not looking in the right places, right? And that's something that we just got to always remember moving forward. So, you know. If nobody has questions, that's okay. Nobody has questions, that's okay. But please get the handout. There's a couple of things in the handout at the end. I kind of give you kind of a checklist of things for you to understand, things for you to take with you as you move on to the next lesson, right? Because the next lesson is going to be something a little bit more in depth, right? A little bit more in depth. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to pull it out because I want to make sure that I know exactly what the next lesson is going to be so that you know exactly what the next lesson is going to be. And I don't want to tell you anything different. Right? So when we talk about the introduction to Yoruba cosmology, the next lesson we're going to compare the Lukumi cosmology, right, to the biblical, the New Age, and the Afro-diasporic, right, belief system. We're going to explore differences between the Lukumi creation, the Genesis, the Big Bang Theory, right? Gary, you're going to jump on this one. I know you are, right? And we're going to begin to kind of see those things. We're going to discuss some of the dangers of blending incompatible belief systems. We're going to talk about the clarity, right, of what Lukumi rejects, right? And I would tell you that one of those things is the reward system. Right, so there's going to be a lot of goodness in this next lesson as we begin to, again, get back to the introduction of what is the Yoruba cosmology? What is this thing? Right. And then after that, we're going to get to the reflection point of understanding the cosmology, right? Reflect on cosmology of personal and ritual impact, right? Where we're going to talk about the reflections, right? And we're going to begin to talk about each and every one of you And we're going to begin to open up and understand how we should be better aligning ourselves. And we're going to run that drill because after we're done with this introduction, and we're going to jump into Ori, and we're going to understand Ori, the personal inner consciousness, the breath of God that lives within us. And we're going to begin to understand how do we seat our destiny. We're going to learn the difference between Ori, Inpuri, and the spiritual intuition, right? And how to develop that alignment with Ori in daily life. So a lot to unpack there, a lot to unpack. So I want to make sure that you guys understand that because once I start getting into Ori in Unit 2, then once we understand the framework for the Yoruba cosmology, we now understand Ori. That's when we're going to start we're going to hit the gas a little harder and we're going to talk about Eshu. We're going to understand who Eshu is and the force of the divine justice of choice, consequence. We're going to dispel some of these myths and we're going to establish the correct Lokumi understanding of Eshu's role in ritual and in life. And that's just the beginning, right? That's just that will be month 3. And then we go into month 4. We talk about the 4 pillars of Ifá. We'll talk about the structure of the Ifá Corpus. And we're going to talk about Iwapale one month. And then we're going to talk about understanding the roles and responsibilities of an Aleyo, the spiritual and social responsibilities. We're talking about so many different things. But hey, with that said, I'm not gonna bore you. I'm looking through to see if there's any questions, comments, concerns. I got a couple of things here. Buddha boy, Parino, I really love the Pataki about the 2 hills. Would you be willing to write it out for me? I try to capture it, but I don't want to represent anything. No, Buddha boy, I'll put it in our spiritual chat, right? Perfect, perfect, perfect. Buddha boy, Parino, when you speaking on marking consecrated items and bowls and other things. Can you explain what that means? When you speak on marking consecrated items and bowls, Paul, help me understand a little bit more. What do you mean by marking? Is this something that I said, something that I wrote? I just need to understand the context a little bit more. Because I would tell you when we talk about marking consecrated items, that is something that the priests and priestesses do, before any consecration. So that maybe that can be that. When we talk about a bulls, we talk about a bulls that are marked behind divination. Why? Because I'm throwing down signs, I'm marking signs, right? And then you get a bull. So that is in order to ensure that we have the alignment that we need. All right, let's see. The battery has a both anode and a cathode. With either, there is no current. Ay, bro, boy, bucheche. That's a positive and a negative. Absolutely, Gary. The spiritual world cannot be described by Olorilje. Gary, I'm gonna have to hold back on that one. I don't know what that means, but it's all good, my friend. It's all good. Well, Paul, if you don't want to respond here, we respond in our side chat because we got our own spiritual chat, right? Or the group chat, and we can continue that conversation. But hey, everyone, I thank you for definitely jumping on. Thank you for allowing me to take some time from your day. Hopefully, you enjoy these next 2 sessions and you jump on board and you continue this 4-year journey with me as I'm teaching methodically through each lesson, through each month, covering down on a lot, right? So, with that said, Iburu, Iboya, Ibuche, everybody in Cyberland. Thank you for sharing your time with me from your fair Babalao. At least I hope so. Omodo, Mondileke, coming at you. And many blessings to each and every one of you. Hopefully, you guys have a blessed day. And may Allah Dumari, the Orishas, and the Eguns, and the Eremoles always bless you.
Y por ahí vaya, padrino.
Buraboya, buraboya.
Uruguay, mucho che, padrino.
Hey, buraboya. You guys have a blessed one. All right, all right, all right. And now I need to end it from YouTube.